Hello, I'm CJ Wellerman. Don't forget to subscribe to our show. Now let's get into it. I have a question for you. Why are Americans so deaf, dumb and blind to US war crimes committed in the Muslim world? And more importantly, why don't they know or care about the slaughter of innocent civilians by American forces, period? I mean, even those who most definitely and absolutely do know the gory details of US atrocities in Afghanistan and Iraq pretend like they don't, even when talking about Russian war crimes in Ukraine.
The decision of one man to launch a wholly unjustified and brutal invasion of of Ukraine. Iraq, anyway.
Oops, what a total dumbass. What a total war criminal. But what prompted the idea for this episode was something that CNN's Anderson Cooper said during a recent interview, where he essentially feigned ignorance about US war crimes committed in Iraq while condemning Russian war crimes in Chechnya and Ukraine.
I do think it's inappropriate to compare the Russian bombing of Grozny and what we witnessed there with the war in Iraq. I mean, to say that innocents are killed. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, the horrible things happen.
Half a million Iraqis killed, my brother.
Well,
500,000.
Anderson Cooper knows better. He was embedded with US troops in Iraq, but nevertheless, he couldn't resist the temptation to minimize US war criminality while condemning the same crimes committed by Russia. That said, Russia is a bona fide terrorist state. And very few Americans have difficulty in making that case, because most have seen footage of Russian warplanes deliberately bombing schools, mosques, and hospitals in Syria on behalf of the Assad regime for the past decade. But to any impartial outside observer, the United States is also a bona fide terrorist state. It not only killed 500,000 Iraqis during the 1990s, but also 1 million more during the 2003 invasion and occupation, a fact that non-American commentators have little trouble in pointing out.
A million people in Iraq.
That is a separate...
You killed 1 million people in Iraq.
A recent report shows that the full death toll from the United States-led invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq has surpassed 4.5 million people, 90% of whom were Muslim.
Shukran zero.
Now, to be fair, most of these people were not killed directly by US forces, but by the ripple effects these wars caused, such as ensuing waves of violence, civil war, starvation, and disease. We also know that US forces routinely murdered and tortured innocent civilians, carpet-bombed civilian neighborhoods, and massacred entire villages. We know this to be true because we have seen leaked Pentagon tapes, like this one published by WikiLeaks in 2010, which showed a US Apache gunship mowing down innocent civilians and journalists in Baghdad in 2007. But we also know US soldiers committed war crimes in Muslim countries because former US soldiers have told us how. US war crimes flow directly from the dehumanization of Muslims.
And what's inherent to that training? Well, people in the Middle East are referred to as Hajis, camel jockeys, towel heads, barbarians, terrorists. We were killing people. I mean, we were killing innocent people. People were being taken captive. If they looked like a quote-unquote insurgent, you did what you wanted to do with them. It was a free-for-all.
But before we go on, we urgently need your help to counter injustices in the Muslim world, and we can't continue this effort without you. So please consider supporting my journalism at patreon.com/CJ Wellerman. Please join them in helping me bring these stories to a wider audience. Thank you. Now back to our show. So why don't ordinary Americans know or care about the crimes committed in their name and in Muslim lands? Well, the answer to that question is complex. But let's start with basic ignorance and the fact that a majority of Americans can't locate anything on a map, let alone Iraq and Afghanistan.
Can you name a country on this map?
I believe that's Africa?
Nope.
Russia?
Nope, that's China. Anything over here?
All right, so it's basically Europe.
Where's Europe?
Don't know.
Are you a Democrat by chance?
I am not.
Can you name a country on this map?
Asia or Africa?
That's a continent.
Oh, okay.
Can you
Nope.
name a country in Africa?
No.
Do you support the president?
Yeah.
Can you name a country on this map?
Um.
How about this?
I don't know.
How about this country? Anything here?
No.
Anything here?
No.
How about this country?
I don't know.
The second reason why Americans are not familiar with US war crimes is that a majority of US citizens don't consider war crimes to be crimes if they're committed by US soldiers. Call it blind patriotism or call it callous indifference. Americans just don't give a single damn about dead Iraqis or Afghans, even when innocent women and children are massacred. In fact, multiple studies have shown the American public gives moral license to anybody they believe is fighting on a just side, which helps explain why a majority supported former US President Trump's move to pardon US soldiers convicted of war crimes, including Lieutenant Clint Lawrence, who murdered innocent civilians in Afghanistan. And despite Trump's pardon being condemned by soldiers who fought alongside the convicted war criminal.
Clint Lawrence killed the enemy, and yet he's serving in prison today.
The soldier done wrong by the federal government, and it's like, dude, the rest of the platoon's right over here, and we're telling you you're wrong.
Was there anybody in the platoon that was with Clint that said that that was the wrong decision? That I don't rightly know.
He ordered the killing of civilians.
It made me sick.
I'm not saying that he didn't make mistakes, but war is ugly, war is messy.
It made me sick that he wasn't even allowed to wear the uniform again.
Pardoning US war criminals reinforces the message that's long been heard in Muslim countries, that US troops can rape and murder to their heart's content, and that US leaders will defend them to the hilt. And even when irrefutable evidence of war criminality does come to light, military officials invariably blame the atrocities on just a few bad apples, which was the phrase former Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld used to describe American guards accused of abusive behavior at Abu Ghraib in 2004. A few bad apples is a phrase that's not only used to cover up evidence of systemic abuse and the frequent occurrence of war crimes committed by US soldiers in foreign lands, but also by US police departments to cover up police brutality.
Well, here's the thing, man. Whenever the cops gun down an innocent black man, they always say the same things, man. They always say the same thing. It's like, well, it's not most cops. It's just a few bad apples. It's just a few bad apples. Bad apple. That's a lovely name for murderer. It's like, how'd they get that one? Bad apple. That almost sounds nice. I mean, I've had a bad apple. It was tart, but it didn't choke me out.
It most definitely wasn't a few bad apples that raped young Iraqi boys in front of their mothers at Abu Ghraib. Instead, it was a barrel of apples, or rather an entire military system that condones and encourages that kind of violence by dehumanizing Muslim populations. In 2016, I wrote an article that argued Americans are pro-torture and proud of it, after a Reuters poll found that nearly 2/3 of Americans believe the use of torture on suspected Muslim terrorists is justifiable, which explains why Trump, the ever-shrewd political entrepreneur, loves promising to use torture in Muslim lands.
And then they say to me, what do you think about waterboarding? I say, I think it's fine. I like it. I like it. I think we should go much, much, much further than waterboarding.
This attitude and rhetoric is absolutely vulgar. And I've interviewed several survivors of Abu Ghraib, Bagram Air Base and Guantanamo Bay, including Ali Al-Mari and Moazzam Beg. Both men were found innocent, but only after spending years locked in a tiny steel cage and without any legal rights. Here's Moazzam to explain just a small snapshot of his horrific ordeal at Gitmo.
It was just me, the cage, and what was outside the cage was at any given time a guard or two that were watching me continuously. The only way I understood or knew there were other prisoners there was through the guards. And occasionally, if there was screaming going on, screams of pain, sometimes there would be prisoners who lost their minds and were screaming out of anguish.
Americans don't care about these war crimes because the media and Hollywood present illegal tactics such as torture and extrajudicial assassinations as essential tools in the war on terror. In other words, American attitudes towards killing Muslims, detaining Muslims, and torturing Muslims are heavily influenced by the movies and television shows they see.
I taught a class at UCLA on the CIA. I did a survey of my students to see what they knew about intelligence and what their attitudes were. And I just sort of threw in a question about spy-themed entertainment and how much they watched movies like James Bond and Jason Bourne, 24, which was very popular at the time. The students who said they always watched the TV show 24 were far more likely to support torture, assassination, rendition, indefinite detention of terror suspects, a whole host of things more than their peers.
But if you're looking for the number one reason why Americans don't know or care about crimes committed by their armed forces in foreign lands, then you can find it here.
Asks, will you appoint a special prosecutor, ideally Patrick Fitzgerald, to independently investigate the gravest crimes of the Bush administration, including torture and warrantless wiretapping?
I don't believe that anybody is above the law. On the other hand, I also have a belief that we need to look forward as opposed to looking backwards. And part of my job is to make sure that, for example, at the CIA, you've got extraordinarily talented people who are working very hard to keep Americans safe. I don't want them to suddenly feel like they've got to spend all their time looking over their shoulder.
Wow, there it is. And when a US president says he's unwilling to prosecute war crimes that took place in the past, he's basically admitting the US doesn't prosecute any war crimes committed by US armed forces. And let's not forget that when the International Criminal Court called for an investigation into US war crimes in Afghanistan, the US threatened to sue the court and arrest its judges.
We will ban its judges and prosecutors from entering the United States. We will sanction their funds in the US financial system, and we will prosecute them in the US criminal system. We will do the same for any company or state that assists an ICC investigation of Americans.
Remember that clip the next time the US harps on about the rule of law, human rights, and democracy. But let me finish with this. Americans should know and care about war crimes committed in their name, and they should want to see their war criminals prosecuted, because failing to do so undermines US credibility and inflames anti-American sentiment around the world. The kind of blowback that could potentially inspire another 9/11 or physical attacks against American tourists. But most of all, they should care because Muslim lives matter too. Anyway, that's my time for today. Please don't forget to subscribe to this channel, and we kindly ask you please support our effort to expose and confront injustices in the Muslim world by becoming a member of this show at patreon.com/CJWilderman. We can't produce, sustain, and grow this show without your help, and we offer exclusive benefits to those who do. But for now, good night, good morning, wherever you are, and stay blessed.